Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth episode now of Mantripp Meets. And I don't think that there is anybody in the powerboat racing world, certainly not in the hydroplane racing world, who has never heard of the man who we have on the show tonight. His racing career actually spreads over 5 decades, would you believe, only recently retiring. And he needs really no introduction other than to say he is Rixie. His name is, of course, Peter Rix. So let's just have a look at what is coming up a little later on.
Peter Rix, also from Lowestoft, competes in the sports top class.
Everybody wants to beat everybody else on the water and not on the bank. And as you can see now, there's people helping other people to try and get boats going. I've just been helping somebody else. Everybody on the water. It's a very, very friendly atmosphere in the sport. You know, it's a damn good all-round sport.
And I think you can appreciate just from the clips there, the early Rixie, the early days of Rixie racing, Peter Rix, how passionate he was back then. I tell you what, that never even changed. Even now, we've had an off-air conversation. He's still as passionate today as he was back in the very, very early 70s. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Peter Rix to the show. And Rixie, are you there?
I'm waiting.
Yeah, sorry to keep you waiting there. We had a slight gremlin just before we started. But so, Rixie, just where are we in your house tonight? I know where we are, but tell everybody.
I'm sitting in my bar. We have our own clubhouse type bar thing at home. I built that probably 18 years ago, and we spend quite a few Thursdays in here. And in fact, last year I've been here every Thursday because there's no clubhouse and club to go to. It's been locked up for 12 months, so this is the only place I can sit and think back the old days and have a drink or two, and I haven't got to drive home either, so nor is my wife. So that's great, you know. Yeah, I'm chilled out in the bar to talk to you and anybody else who wants to talk and listen tonight.
Well, that's great. We are very, very privileged then to be in Rixie's bar this evening. So thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being in your own personal little area, Rixie's corner. You know, I mean, you've got your own little corner in the clubhouse. And talking of the clubhouse, I mean, you're telling me earlier you've been down the park today. It's in East Anglia where we are, the racecourse. Just tell us what the weather conditions were like down there today, Peter.
It was absolutely awful. I mean, I've seen it like that before. And we did try and race once a Battle of Britain like this many, many years ago, but you couldn't go out there today in a rescue boat. I mean, it was really, really bad. Whenever it's coming from the west, southwesterly, down the Broads, there's white tops everywhere. It's cold. But, you know, you wouldn't have put a rescue boat in the water today. That's how bad it was today. And like a week ago, it was like glass down there. So that's how unpredictable Alton Broad is.
Yeah, I think the weather forecast, I think, for the weekend is not too great either. I think there's 40 mile an hour gust of wind tomorrow. I think Saturday is meant to be wet. So, yeah, it's typical Alton Broad powerboat racing weather. Of course, normally, Rixie, you'd be sorting out, this time of year, you'd be doing the medicals. You'd be sorting all that lot out with Dr. Anderson. Atkins, sorry.
Yep, 12 months ago now, a week ago, 12 months ago, we were down there doing the medicals for all the drivers. And it was like a week after the second medical session, this damn virus came along and suddenly hit us and everything came to a standstill. And none of us could believe it at first, what it was. And they said it come from China. And I said, well, everything else come from China today. But this virus arrived and we never realised how serious it was going to be. And they brought in this lockdown last year and we ourselves down, and by June we thought things were getting better, and we hoped and we thought, oh well, maybe things will get better and we'll get on the water, but it didn't. And now, it's taken 12 months to realise how bad this virus is, and it's killing quite a few people, And friends of mine have actually been in hospital with it, so I know how serious it is. And it scared me, really, because I've been around in the racing scene since I was 10 years old, and this is the first year, last year, I've had any racing. That's the first time ever it's ever happened in my entire life. So we don't know what a virus is until it comes along. We can't see it, we can't detect it. But if you catch it, you're certainly bad with it, Yeah. So we have to be careful.
But the main thing is, obviously, yourself, you're fit and well and healthy and have been over this last 12 months. And Trish has been fit and well and healthy, of course, because...
Well, we locked ourselves up.
Yeah, locked yourself away. And I think, if you don't mind me saying, I think you've had the jab now, and I take it, your arm is all... Had you have been racing, your arm would have been race ready, and you'd have been...
I didn't even know I'd had the needle, actually. That was that the girl who done it was an RAF young lady, and I said, have you done? And she said, yeah. I said, I didn't even feel it. So I've had no repercussions from it, and I keep recommending it to everybody. Don't say no, get it done. You need it, So we have to wait and see, but it's going to be midsummer this year before we know whether we got on top of this damn virus, So I'm hoping we have, but funnily enough, I picked a good time to retire from racing. 2 years ago, I retired, and
so it's
all
your
this
fault.
has come along.
You cursed it at the end of the year, the end of that season. You just cursed it, and that was it. Anyway, we don't want to talk about virus. We want to talk about Rixie. That's why we're here tonight. We watched the other end of the spectrum last week, where we had the new young up-and-coming superstar, Thomas Mantripp. He is where you were at, I guess, sort of back in the 70s. So tell me, Peter, how did you get involved with powerboat racing? Why did you get involved in the sport?
Well, it's funny. In the old days, in the school days, obviously, Mick Penty and myself used to go to the swimming pool at Alton Broad. I'm talking about now when we were real youngsters. We used to swim during the summer holidays and then bunk over the wall into the park and watch the racing. And that's how me and Mick got involved, bunking over the wall, watching the racing instead of paying to come in the park. And it was quite good in them days. There was only two lots of boats racing, the sports boats and the hydros, but that's how we first of all both got involved. During the summer holidays, we went to Alton Broad swimming pool and spent every day swimming. Gordon Rix used to run the swimming pool, who was a relation of mine, so we swam for nothing every day. With young David Jones, we all went to the pool, spent every day in the pool. But Thursday nights, we heard the noise, so we bunked over the wall, what we call bunked. Jumped over the wall into the park, we didn't have to pay. And that's how we first started to look at powerboat racing. The noise, and I was 10 years old when it started in 1966. That's how I got to know Totty Rossen and Goran Linden and people like that from being 10 years old.
I was saying about you knew Bob, obviously, back in the day when he was a hairdresser.
Yeah, that's where I met Bob Movement. I met Bob Movement, Alton Broad, the local hairdresser, and he'd just taken up powerboat racing. And I told him I used to come down and watch, and he said, can you give me a hand? And I did. I used to go down to the Wherry Hotel and help him launch his boat. We used to help everybody in those days who needed a hand anyway.
And of course, you mentioned the Wherry Hotel. So the Wherry Hotel, that was a great atmosphere back then when the boats used to be launched from there. I remember, I'm still young enough or old enough to remember back in the day when boats used to be sort of like either taken out via the slipway or, you'd launch them by hand and people would give each other a hand. Probably not so much of that these days at Coleman's. I always felt that we lost a little bit of atmosphere when we moved from the Wherry Hotel slipway to Coleman's, but obviously they filled in the slipway. So yeah,
the Wherry Hotel was handy because we all used to get down there, us young little gang of people, and we'd help the hydro drivers because the sports boat drivers could launch, push a button and go. The hydros couldn't, so we'd launch the hydros and then Lionel would jump in Doug Willie's boat, I'd jump in somebody else's boat, and we'd paddle from the Wherry Hotel to the clubhouse. And that got you in the park without paying as well, you see.
See, there's another motive.
So that's how we used to get in the park. We'd help the driver all night long, and if they didn't break down, we'd paddle the boats back to the Wherry afterwards if they couldn't do it and take the boats out. But it was really good in the old days because the general public on the park, there was thousands of people on the park used to watch the racing. There was only two classes, sports boats and hydros, to race. So you got your 6 races in and your scramble race. And after the racing finished, the general public used to invade the Wherry Hotel car park. You'd meet the public met the drivers. The presentation was there, and it was a real good atmosphere in the sport in those days. A real good atmosphere. And everybody got to know everybody else.
So you mentioned earlier, you said about Mick, you said about David Jones and yourself, you're all there, you're all watching from, sort of from a very young age. Two things. Who was the first person to get the boat first? Was it you? Was it Mick? Was it Dave? And,
David Jones and myself both raced at Wells in 1971 in the Colts Trophy. David drove his father's boat and I drove my Bob Oldman's boat. And we went off to this race, and it was a novices type of race. You didn't need a licence then. It was after the meeting was over, and you had a couple of heats. And before I went, my father said to me, "Peter, if you win that race, I'll buy you a boat." And he thought he was on a winner there, but he weren't. So I won the race, won the trophy, and he had to buy me a boat. So he did. He bought me a boat. It was mentioned in the Lotus Journal, 12th of September 1971, for God's sake. And Father had it in his head then that we've supplied you with a boat, you can find yourself an engine, you're a paper boy, you'll find the money from somewhere. That's what Dad had in his head in them days. And that was how I was supposed to start racing. But it was
you could have gone
1975.
down your father's route. You could have gone down the wrestling route, I guess. That could have been another option. Or was that never in your head?
With the wrestling, my father used to wrestle, and Mick Penty and myself used to be the personal seconds and the people that used to go to the holiday camps every night and build the ring up before the wrestling took place in that. So we had a lot of friendship together that way in the wrestling side of it all. And my father wrestled for 25 years, so when he was Bad Billy Pye, the bad boy in wrestling, and quite a few people knew my father, and he disqualified more times than he was, which he actually won anything, because he was a bad boy in the sport, you see, so... But Mick and myself used to travel a holiday camp 7 nights a week at holiday camps during the summer doing the wrestling with my dad. So, because Ginge came along as well, and me, Mick and Ginge and David Jones went into the wrestling side of it, but we all got together, and this is how the friendship bond came between us all, really and truthfully, that and the racing as well. But we all dreamed that we were going to get out and race. One day we were going to get out, all of us, and get out and race, and we all did.
And you all did, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was nice that you had that vision. It was nice that you three as a group of friends, and you all raced. And I'll come on to sort of, especially like you and Mick a little bit later on in the show, because there's one or two things I want to just obviously cover. But yeah, so going back, your dad bought you the boat after you proved him wrong. You proved that you can win, and you won, and that. So you had the boat, but that was 71. But fast forward then to 75 with a boat called Halfwit. So
Yep.
was that this is still in the very early days? Were you still going to Wells with this boat, or were you at Alton?
Wells had finished.
Wells had finished.
The Wells Club had finished, and the Wells Club then transformed into the Stewartby Club. Jean Fisher and her husband Danny Fisher, David Fisher, Cliffy Watts, who's still alive as far as I know today, and Sammy Kidd, they opened the new venue for us in 72 or 73, I can't remember exactly which year it was, at Stewartby. So when we were racing in 75, Bob decided he was coming back into racing after a couple of years off. We got the boat from Jack Codling, and we got the engine, we put this outfit together, and we both raced it at Alton Broad in 1975. Bob done the nationals at Stewartby and elsewhere with it, and that's how I really got hooked. I was into racing, and I really got stuck at it then, Bob done a couple of years and retired again in the pub trade. He was the manager of lots and lots of pubs and hotels and things. So Bob retired from the racing until 79, but I carried on, and like everything, you start off racing. We were shoestring racing. I just got married, and my son came along, so the money was tight, and oh my goodness, all the usual dramas we have. But it was 79 before I actually kicked off racing every year, regularly as clockwork every year, and that was sponsorship that helped in those days to get on the water.
And again, something which I want to cover earlier, because or later on in the show, because sponsorship. Your boat, I don't think has hardly ever not really had any sponsors on. There's always sort of, especially in the later years, like from memories of you in the 80s, in the 90s, and even right up
Yeah,
until the mono. There was
yeah,
always a name, whether it be a chip shop or if it was Mike Stanton's garage or Triangle Garage or whatever. There was always some form of sponsorship on the boat. Not necessarily the biggest sponsors in the world, but there was always something there as a backup, and but we'll talk about that in a minute, because I want to know what I want to know later on is how you got those kind of sponsors. But we'll find that out in a minute. What I want to know immediately now, though, is obviously, we'll talk about engines. Your first two engines back in 71 and 75, they were Mercury engines, so
yeah.
not really an engine now that you associate with hydros. It's more F4, Formula One, Formula Two, but then the passion engine. I want to call it tonight the passion engine, because I know that you've got a lot of passion for it. Jonesy had a lot of passion for it. James Boggess of more recent times, I think, also has a passion for this engine as well. The Crescent, I mean, it was an engine which you kind of moved on and started what I'm going to say your proper racing career, 78, with a Crescent. What was it about that engine? For me, it was always the noise. It was a unique noise for me, and they looked quick. But what was it for you?
Well, they were competition when they were built in '64. They were competition for Koenig at the time. They were racing engines, but Crescent used to build stock engines as well, and we used to race stock Crescent engines on monohulls years ago. David Fisher raced one on a hydroplane. Norman Whitlock's son had dry gym with a Crescent engine on, so we had the two lots of Crescent engines racing late '60s and early '70s. But Crescent was a beautiful engine made in Sweden. They only made 115 of the racing engines, the 64 horsepower engines. They made 115 of those and 120 of the 50 horsepower two-cylinder. We call them two-chamber. They were two-port engines. They only made that amount of engines. And we saw them when the Swedish drivers brought them over to England in 66, 67, 68. Beautiful engines, good competition for Koenig in their day as well. And I love the engines, the same as Jonesy and Boggess did. And they done their bit during the 60s, right up to the start of the 70s. The Crescents were beautiful engines. So then obviously Koenig updated and they went on, and the Crescents drifted off and were forgotten about, actually, not used for many, many years.
What about spares back in the day? So obviously you've just told us that there wasn't that many made. So did they back it up with spares, or were the spares even back then hard to get hold of? And what was the
They
situation?
backed it up with spare parts, and there was a man called Harry Venstrom who used to work at the Crescent factory and was the driver himself. And he made sure that when they stopped producing the racing engines, 1972, with the last brand new blocks, that he collected as many of the spare parts as he could. And that's what he did. Because people weren't racing those engines internationally in those days and that, he hung on to the spares for many years. Because we were using those engines for club racing at Alton Broad, because they were quicker than the L50 Mercs that we all used to race in the stock side. They were cheap to run in those days because they were petrol engines. So we started to use them. Then we moved on to Koenig, and the Crescents were all put under the bench and put to sleep, unfortunately.
What kind of speeds were you kind of getting at with the Crescents back then,
Todd Rawson at Alton Broad equalled the lap record with Doug Willey. They both had the same lap record at Alton Broad. This was in the 70s, this was. And this was 45 seconds. And that was the lap record in those days with a 500 Koenig and a 500 Crescent. Both those two equalled the lap record in those days. That was with the Crescent and with the Koenig. So that was very, very good in its days. But then the Koenig progressed, went on to be quicker and quicker and quicker. And anybody racing at club racing in those days had the choice. You could either race a stock hydroplane, which was a standard outboard engine, whether it be Mercury, Johnson, Crescent, whatever it was. You bolt it on the back of the boat, you pull the string or push a button and off you go. Or you could use a racing engine, which was the methanol burning Koenig, or the Crescent engine. And because the Koenig took over in those days, there was nothing else anyway.
For you, it took over in 1979 when you had your first Koenig engine, and then, all through your career were on off, really, I guess. But obviously towards the end of the racing with hydros, although Koenig was then later replaced really by Connie, and then obviously ultimately by Rossi and blah blah blah, everybody else. But Koenig 79, you've got the Koenig. In your head, are you thinking, right, I've got this Koenig power head now and the leg and everything else, and I'm going to go out and blitz everybody? Was that your mindset then?
Well, it was a 350 Koenig engine, which I was very kindly given by Jeff Terry at the time. I'd been helping Jeff Terry, mechanic with Jeff Terry, and he'd had this 350 engine, which I think came from Taffy Morgan, that had blown up a few times, etc., etc. So he gave me a box of bits and said, "Here, Peter, here's an engine." He gave me a hull, which had been damaged, and I repaired the lot, got it up and running. And I went to the first meeting at Essex that year, which was before Alton Broad started, and I won the meeting, won the final trophy with a 350 Koenig. And it actually got mentioned in the Hydrocat magazine, Rix Wins. That was my first race I'd ever done at Essex with a 350 Koenig, and I won the meeting. Then the rest of the year, Alton brought out the usual thing with the Koenig and the ignition system, unreliability, breaking down, etc., etc., etc. But Doug Willie came along and Jeff Terry were there, and they backed me up on it, and we progressed through with the Koenig.
And you did progress through, 79 you ran with the Koenig, 1980 you ran with the Koenig, 81 it was, you were back with the Crescent again, back in
Yeah.
81. So what made you come back to that power?
It was club racing. The Crescent was cheaper to run. It ran on normal petrol rather than methanol. It was a lot cheaper to run. When you've got a mortgage and kids to pay for and everything else, your budget is very, very low down. Fortunately for me, I had your uncle who came and sponsored me, Leadfoot Disco. I had Dennis Meadows with his post office and Slush Puppy came and sponsored me. So I got back out with the Crescent and won everything I raced at Alton Broad that year, won the Alan Ashford Trophy at the Dinner and Downs, and never had a breakdown. A complete season with that Crescent, and it never broke down once. So that's why I done it, to get out there and race. Even in the group handicaps, starting with Doug Willie and all the other Koenigs and that, they were much quicker, but I used to get in there with them at the start and maybe lead them at the first buoy. And then they'd be away and gone. But they broke down and I didn't. So I kept going and going and going. So it was good fun. I loved it. It was good fun. So we went back to the Crescent, and I still love them to this day.
So you mentioned Doug Willie there. Obviously, Doug Willie probably, I'm guessing, was one of your race heroes of the time. Well, I kind of know it anyway, but you tell me about Douglas.
Well, Douglas was my mentor, as they say. And in the early days with the Koenig, Doug Willie would always give me advice what to do, how to do it, etc., etc. He was the best driver we had at Alton Broad. Saying that, Jack Codling, Julian's father, was another brilliant driver as well. But they would always help you as much as they could. But the best thing that ever happened to me with Doug Willie was I needed a cylinder head for my 350 Koenig. And somebody said, "Go and see Douglas. Douglas will sell you a cylinder head." So Carl Connolly drove me over to Manford to Doug Willie's, and I arrived, and Douglas said, "Oh, hello, Pete, what do you want?" I said, "I need a cylinder head for my 350. Come in the workshop," he said. So I went in the workshop, and he got a cylinder head. He put it in his milling machine, his lathe, he machined it all up. So I said, "Thank you, Douglas, how much?" And he said, "How much you got in your pocket?" And I said, "What?" He said, "How much you got in your pocket?" I think it was 30 quid. And that was a lot of money in there. I said, "I got £30. Thank you very much." And he took the £30. So I thought, God, that was expensive. So we said to Carl, "Have you got a big car?" So Carl said, "Yeah." So he opened the boot of the car, and Douglas cleaned out his workshops with everything, a gearbox for the broken bearing or whatever it was, and he filled the car with bits. And he said, "Ah, Rixie, that'll keep you going all winter in the workshop." And it did. He gave me so many parts for that 30 quid. That's the best £30 I've ever spent.
And that kind of turned around into, at the time you were the young gun, as Rex King calls them. And I've kind of nicked that saying off him because I quite kind of like it. But you were the young gun back then. But did you ever think sort of that years down the road that you would then become sort of like the Doug Willie of the day? Because, we see a little bit in the video clip that we played a couple of minutes ago of you, and you helping other people in their racing career. You'll find bits, you put outfits together for them, and even today, even now as we speak, you'll find them boats for we'll talk about them later as well. But you're finding boats and engines and equipment for new people. Did that back in the day? Did you always have that as a long-term plan, or did that not really enter your head?
It was something that I'd always wanted to do it as long as I could. And obviously, in those days, the people that were racing, I would say 75% of the people that were actually out there racing hydros were business people, had a little bit of money to spare. I was a working class, person with all the usual bills to pay, as Mick Penty was, for God's sake. We didn't have a lot of money, full stop, and it was sponsors we needed to get to keep us going. And I was fortunate enough to come along with I had small sponsors in the early days that just cut the costs, but Mike Stanton came along for me as a brilliant sponsor. And Ernie Mickleborough came along for Mick Penty, and Ernie Mickleborough was the best sponsor anybody could have. And he sponsored Mick, and Mick got everything. New boots, new engines, Mick got the lot, which took Mick right to the top, And I didn't have that kind of sponsorship. But we were still mates. We still raced at Alton Broad. We battled with each other at Alton Broad as best we could. That was the fun side of racing. And because Nigel Bilton and Keith McVeigh and Peter Bright and people like that were all racing, and club racing was enjoyable fun, and we still had mixed class racing, stock boots and racing boots and that together. The race was as good as the handicaps were as good as, if you see what I mean. So it was great fun. They were great days.
I want to just play a clip now, if I may, Peter, of you and Mick in action, just to remind people, because sometimes, some people won't have seen this. So I don't even know where the video originates from, so I apologise. I get a suspicion it may be Glenn Cushion's video. If it is, thanks very much in advance, because we're going to play it. If it's not, then thank you, wherever this video comes from. But I just want to play it because it shows you, Peter, in action, head to head. I don't know I think it must have been a Thursday night club race or whatever, but you two are racing like it's a world championship event. The competition you'll see in a second. Well, you won't, but everybody else will see in a second how competitive you both were. And I'd say you were both pretty much at the top of your game. Everybody, have a look at this. Sorry, what we watched there was you and Mick head to head. Mick came into the race flat out. You were sort of a little bit more on your back foot, but you sort of just, I don't know if you were possibly almost early on the clock, but whatever. And then you all went round the turn boy at the bottom. You all went round the wherry turn, and then you kind of Mick's gone up on the inside, and you're on the outside, and everyone would have seen the clip there, and it looked like Mick had got the better of you. But then all of a sudden, wow, the profile windows boat, the one with the cowling on, which we'll talk about in a minute, just found some extra speed, and then you passed Mick, and then you're off. You're leaving him, and then there were some other boats up ahead, and you're kind of leaning on them to get out of the way, especially at the top turn. We just see there in one of the videos where you're not pushing him out of the way. There's no contact, but you made it very aware that Rixie's coming through. And as I said earlier, and actually just even looking back then, the conditions looked a bit lumpy. I know what it's like. It can look calm and be rough, but to me it looked fairly lumpy out there, and there would have been other boats there and a lot faster boats than what we have now. There was more outboards then than what there are now. I mean, how hard? I mean, Mick was obviously a hard driver. How hard was it to beat him and stay ahead of Mick?
Well, the thing is, Alton Broad in those days, the racing hydroplanes were mixing with the stock outboards that were out there anyway. So if I was chasing Mick or he was chasing me or we were chasing Stephen Green, whatever, we were trying to weigh up each other who's going to go where so we could nip on the inside, the outside, whatever. But then you suddenly run into one or two stock boats. And of course, in those days, the inboard hydros were out there as well. So we had the R1s in the same race. So it was rough water. You had to have eyes at the back of your head around Alton Broad. It's only a 2-boy course, but as me thinking about Mick and is he going to get past me, etc., and you'd run into an inboard or a stock boat and you thought, my God, it was hard work. Club racing at Alton Broad in those days, with the 3 classes all mixed together, was hard work. It was harder work than actually going to the national meetings when you all jumped off the line together. Clock start, mind you, but you all start at once, apart from 350, obviously. Yeah. Because you had so many mixed classes of boats out there, but it was great fun as well.
I mean, tell us a bit about the inboards. I mean, the wash that the inboards kind of give off was a totally different wash to like the outboards. And that must have been. I mean, I remember being behind you when you had the sit down hydro. And thinking, oh, that's not very nice. I don't like being behind that. I'll just stay out of the way. But yeah. I mean, it must have been the same for you travelling at 100 mile an hour behind Nigel or whoever it was. I mean, Neil Allen, I think, even had the inboard once, didn't he? So yeah. Being stuck behind that kind of wash at that kind of speed, you kind of have to really be able to read the water.
Well, the inboards like Nigel Bilton. They were fast. They were really quick boats. And they didn't give too much wash, to be honest with you, because they were riding above the water. It was the slower boats that were creating more wash, whether it be a stock boat, whether a stock hydro, whether it was a 250 Koenig in those days or whatever. The slower boats were putting up more wash. So you had to be careful, obviously. The R1s took a different line, turning at the bottom buoy. The bottom buoy was a hard buoy to get round, no matter what you raced. That was like putting monohulls and cats together, which they did in the old days years ago. It was a nightmare because nobody knew who was going to be where, for God's sake. But club racing was a good race to come into, apart from the enjoyment. And bearing in mind for us with racing hydros, it was only 15 minutes maximum for 3 heats. We were going round in 3 minutes 55, 4 minutes 10 seconds for 1 heat. That's quick. That seems the longest 4 minutes in your life. And when you come back, you're totally shattered in a hydro. Your arms are aching, your knees are aching, whatever. And you've had R1s out there, monohulls out there, but you laughed and you enjoyed it. And after the race and finished, the best thing was having a beer and laughing about it afterwards and talking about it afterwards. But in those days, that was, we had 20 meetings at Alton Broad, which we used to try and do as many as we could. But we used to do another 10 meetings a year at the other clubs, because there was a lot of other clubs in those days that used to race, whether it be club meeting or nationals. So we were doing something like 30 a year. So we needed sponsors to pay for all this one way or another,
So tell us about the other clubs, because as we all know, we're very thin now on numbers of clubs. But I mean, back then, hydros, it was a very split thing, wasn't it? Hydros had their own race venues, circuit boats and monos, cats had their own venues, and it was back in the day, it was rare that they mixed. There was 1 or 2 clubs, obviously, where we mixed, but I mean, Lid, then, and you're now going to tell me all the clubs that I can't remember, because there was Lid, obviously Grange Waters, the Puddle, and everywhere else, but I can't remember them all. But I'm
Well,
sure that you've got good memories.
Grange Water was a brilliant club. That's the first time I went away with Bob Oban to race at Grange Water. Fantastic little club, fantastic people. George and Nina used to run the club down there with Mike Smith's mum and sister and David Balsam and people like that. A lot of hard work went into that. Chris Appleby and Wally McKinley used to do the barbecues. I mean, it was a great time down there. But in those days, it was Sunday racing only. It weren't Saturday and Sunday. It was Sunday racing only. We had the Lid Club, which was another damn good club. A bit further to drive, another good club. We had the Welsh Harp, where we used to race once a year. That was North Bank Holiday Monday. We'd race there in the afternoon and then try and get back to Alton Broad for the Alton Broad meeting in the evening. Doug Willey was the only one to do that, but he got from London back to Ella with a helicopter, so he did have one go to each circuit and done it. But the Midlands Hydroplane Club at Bodymore was another great club. And Andy Chesman and Gavin Sisby and people put lots of hard work into those clubs. All these clubs, Bedfont, South Cerney, they were all hydroplane clubs. You know, the sports books used to run like their own clubs, and the hydros at their own clubs. The unfortunate thing is the one place I've never been to is up at Carmill Dam. Now, my old mate's still been racing up there for years, and his father used to race. You know who I'm talking about now.
I know who exactly. He's watching, I think.
I've got video of the hydroplanes, the racing hydroplanes, racing up there at Carmill in 1966.
Yeah.
The Swedes came over, Alfie Anderson and Totty Rawson, and they were racing with the Crescents. And there was some Koenigs up there as well, racing up there in the 60s. So Carmill Dam used to race hydros, racing hydros, as well as sports boats in the old days. But then obviously it didn't, and now the only time you go up to Carmill Dam was with the Yamato. So that's one club I never went to. I mean, Colwick Park was another one on Hornpier Point. I could go on and on and on about all these different clubs we used to attend. But that was all the hard work in the days of the Andy Chesmans, the Mike Taylors, and people like that, arranging these different meetings. And Chatham Docks was another fantastic place. That was offshore hydroplane racing, we used to call that, because that was rough down there. But I had some fun down there, and so did Rex King. You know, we both won down there a couple of times. It was good racing, yeah.
So what club would you say out of the other than Alton Broad, because I know Alton Broad's your passion, so sort of the whole package, like with the atmosphere, the racecourse itself, the water and the facilities, what other club would you say back then was the go-to club of the day?
Well, in the early 70s, the Wells Club was like Alton Broad. They used to race every Sunday. They even used to race Boxing Day if it wasn't too windy and rough. They used to race every Sunday, but the times varied because of the tides. That was a good club in my early days at the racing. But my favourite club, two clubs really, was Essex and Bodymore. They were two good clubs. They were fantastic people that organised the clubs and run everything. And we had some great times there. And we used to have to fit racing at Alton Broad Thursday night, Friday go to work, Friday tea time, drive up to Bodymore, and it was a long drive on the old roads in the old days. And then, fortunately for us at Bodymore, Gavin Sisby used to give us the keys to the clubhouse so we could sleep upstairs in the clubhouse, and this is how it went on in the old days. Now, Essex, they used to put a marquee up for us, and we had a bar there and a barbecue. I mean, the camaraderie was unbelievable, and everybody got on with everybody else, whether it was getting drunk the night before or whatever it was in those days. The day of the races, you had to be awake and you had to know what you were doing, not still drunk. But everybody helped everybody else. If you broke your prop, a gearbox, somebody else came and gave you one. You know, they tried their best to get people back out on the water. John Tassel was another one, you know. Yeah. JT out there, he'd be helping everybody else as well. So they were great days. They were great days. It's a shame it's not the same today. That's the way it's gone.
I mean, Bodymore for me was always my favourite other circuit. Actually, Alton Broad, I never really could kind of grasp, and actually, I'm sure some people will agree that I probably still can't grasp where we turn even now. But Bodymore, for me, I used to love it's the islands. You know, you can just drift it. You know, you go through the narrow gap between the island and the bank, and then you drift it round, and then you got the tricky sort of other turn in front of the clubhouse, which almost you double back on yourself. So for me, it was quite a challenging course, and that's only with what 6 of us out there. It must have been awesome. You know, you're doing the speeds. You know, you're doing 100 mile an hour, and there's double.
Well, I remember the National at Bodymore 1985, and we all came in together, the 500s, a massive pack of us coming together. I think Mike Smith had gone off first, and then all the 500s came in together. I turned, Mick Penty turned, Stephen Green turned, and within a second, I was upside down. I was in the water. And everybody went round me, thank God, you know, and the red flags came out, and the boat was upside down, and I was waving my arms in the water, panicking like mad, thinking, my God. And rescue came across, and Joanne Chesman was in the rescue boat. She said, what's the matter, Peter? I said, well, I'm in the water, I'm swimming. She said, put your feet on the bottom. And I said, what? And I put my feet on the bottom, and I stood up, and it was waist deep. And I thought, oh, my God. We got the boat back to the pits, and Nigel Ringwood was there, and the chap from Birmingham that used to build the boats, Arthur Langman, that's right. They jumped in and got the boat repaired, and the R1 driver, Lenny Moore, his daughter lent me her overalls, and I got back out in the rerun. You know, they said, you can go in the rerun, of course you can. And I got back out in the rerun, and I finished third out there that day, even after having that accident, for God's sake. So that was the fun at Bodymore. You know, I didn't get run over, for God's sake. And I've got the video. My father was actually taking the video of that and got the video of me upside down. So them things used to happen. You know, that's just the way racing was.
And they did used to happen. And obviously we move on to a little bit more of a bit more of a rawer subject. And you probably know where I'm going to go next with it. Obviously, 1988, we lost Mick.
Yeah.
Your friend, your childhood friend that you've watched powerboat racing with, started powerboat racing together. And you know, it was a strange night. I mean, what your thoughts on that? What was going through your head? It must have been absolutely horrendous. I can't even imagine what that would have been like at the time.
Well, just prior to that night at Alton Broad, we had the World Championships at Stewartby, the World 500. I was racing, Mick Penty was racing, we were all down there racing, but they had to pick the team. This is how it was done in those days. There was only 5 boats allowed to race for that country. I didn't qualify fast enough to race in the team that day. I was in the repechage. Poor old Mick didn't qualify with his brand new boat, brand new engine. He didn't qualify. He went in the repechage like myself, and he won the repechage race. So he was feeling a bit down in the dumps about that, with a brand new boat, a brand new engine, and didn't qualify. Come Alton Broad, I don't know whether that was a Thursday or 2 Thursdays after, he came down there with a brand spanking new 700. He'd never run the engine. He'd had one other engine, but a brand new engine. And he didn't take it out in practice, and I couldn't understand it that night. He was walking amongst the spectators on the park, talking to them. And I couldn't understand. I thought, this is not Mick, you know. He went his usual self. And he went out in the first race, and he came out the pits. I was then coming in at the start, because he was probably 20 seconds or so behind me. And then after doing one lap, I saw him come past the clubhouse, and it was as thick as a pig, the engine, blue smoke everywhere, totally oiled up. I carried on racing, saw him down at the Wherry Hotel, and he'd gone off the course and was going round and round and round and round in a circle. And I thought, hello, he's cleaning the old girl out. And it did. It cleaned out, you know. And then I'm coming down past the clubhouse, and Mick is coming up towards me. And I thought, God, that boat's high, you know. And that was gone. And that was really moving. And then, bang, as quick as that, there was just a big ball of spray. And I turned to the bottom boy and thought, my God, what's happened, you know. And as I came up the back straight, I slowed down, saw rescue coming in with red flags. And I looked and slowed down and looked, and I couldn't believe it. That was just 1,000 pieces of wood floating around in the Broads. And I thought then, you know, this isn't a good one. This isn't good at all. I got back to Coleman's, and the unfortunate thing for that night, it was Dr. Henderson's first night as being the club doctor. Yeah. We got Mick out of the water on the stretcher, brought him up the steps, but unfortunately Mick was gone. And that broke my heart. I mean, I didn't know what to do. They took him over to the Paget Hospital. I didn't, honest to God, know what to do. Anne was obviously in a hell of a state, for goodness sake. But that's racing, you know, these things do happen. I went to the Paget afterwards, an hour or so afterwards. I went to see Mick after, obviously, he's pronounced dead. I was allowed to go in and see Mick, and I went in with his sister. And I went in and saw Mick lying there, bless his heart. I had a cry. And I said to Mick, I am never giving up hydroplane racing. I'm going to keep this sport going at Alton Broad because you're my best friend. And I walked away. And we had to accept it, you know. He was trying his hardest. He was putting on the pressure. Like everything in those days, the sponsor had bought new engine, knew this, knew that. And he was trying to live up to do. And the unfortunate thing is these accidents do happen. And it did happen, unfortunately. And we lost him, you know, and I swore blind then I didn't want this to happen again. I'm going to keep Alton Broad going,
and
which I tried to do.
Yeah, and you could have quite easily said, no, I see, I've seen, I don't, don't want that to happen to me, and you could have stopped, and
Yep.
No one would have held that against you, no one would have blamed you to stop, but as you've just told us, you made that promise to Mick to carry on, and my goodness, you did carry on, and and you very much kept to your word. So, but I do remember you. I'm sure it's the first race after what I don't know the time scale of how long you went. I don't know if it was the next week or if it was however long that it was before you got back in the boat. But I do remember, and you still drove with the same passion. You still drove fast.
Yeah.
So whatever happened, didn't affect your, the way how you drove out there on the water. So obviously you shunted that to the back of your head and kind of just grabbed it by the balls and kind of got on with it a bit.
We always said the show must go on at the end of the day. And I always said the motto I had, and I used to tell my new drivers that I brought into sport, two ways of looking at this. When in doubt, flat out. Get out there and race. But then also, when in doubt, if somebody stops in front of you, the other thing, when in doubt, pull it out, the jack plug. Pull it out and stop, Team motto, when in doubt, flat out. When in doubt, pull out the jack plug. For goodness sake, that's how it was. Safety conscious. I didn't want to see what happened to Mick happen again. Unfortunately, it did.
Yeah.
And that really broke my heart when we lost Wayne. That really did.
And again, another sad time for the sport, a sad time for the club. And, again, you're racing that day. So
another lad I helped, Wayne was originally a teammate with Mick, then he wasn't. I helped him in Yamato. I took him to Brodenbach, for goodness sake, and he won over there, even though he fell in, for goodness sake. Then he came over to 500, and I helped him all the way through 500. But he was just unfortunate. Same accident as Mick had at the Mick Pentley Memorial Trophy on Battle of Britain Alton Broad. Exactly the same accident, a front ender, gone. We lost him as well. And the sad thing about that is those two accidents, the front enders, with all the health and safety today, Kevlar suits, this helmet, that helmet, with all the rules and regulations, that wouldn't have saved them two lads.
Yeah.
When you have a front ender at 100 mile an hour, that's like an aeroplane crash, that's like the deceleration thing is what does the damage. And it's a shame. It's a shame.
But again, you kept, somehow you managed to pull yourself through another sad time, and again got yourself through that, continued to race, and that must have been harder in certain senses because it's like twice now it's happened on the course at Alton Broad, your home club, and you kind of think, well, I've been lucky all this time, so again, it could have been another excuse to stop, but again, as I said, you didn't. I want to talk though about something completely different, because what I want to talk about is obviously after Mick, after 1988 was a sad year, but then things did take an upturn for you because 1989 you get the opportunity to go to South Africa. So how?
Yeah. That was my friend Rex King, who was living over there at the time. And Anton Van Heerden wanted an English driver over there. Rex said, well, get Rixie over here, for goodness sake. So, I was totally oblivious to all this, what goes on in South Africa. I got a phone call from Anton saying, would you like to come and race in South Africa? Bring your engine. And I looked at, I thought, yeah, I'll go. My dad said, go. For goodness sake, go. All expenses paid, go. So I did. Rex King took care of me when I arrived there, introduced me to Anton Van Heerden, Jonny Oosthuizen, made good friends, went there and raced at Harderpiece Portdown. Manfred Loth was there, the German and the world champion. Sven Cooper was there. raced or tried to race at Harder Peaceport Dam. It was like a piece of water, like wind. It was windy and it was rough. And they had the television cameras there, etc., etc. Manfred Loft finished up being flown off to hospital in a helicopter because he had a nasty crash and the front end of the boot disappeared. I trashed the boat they built me over there. I trashed that in practice with the rough water and was loaned another boat with Cindy Lawrence. I finished the meeting in 4th place, which was good, but I came home myself with a neck collar on because my neck was put out over there. But that was my first trip to South Africa. They then brought the South Africans back to England that year, and they raced at Alton Broad. Cindy Lawrence and Anton van Heerden and Johan Oosthuizen came, stayed with us a couple of weeks, and they raced at Alton Broad, which was good fun. We provided them with boots and bits and pieces, and then the following year, they invited us back again, and this time they said, Rixie, can you bring another driver? Yeah, Keith McVeigh. And will you bring Ginge? Oh, my mechanic, you know. And they said, all expenses paid again. So we did. We went, the three of us flew off to South Africa again and raced again at Benoni. Good race for me. I finished second at that meeting. Wow. Keith McVeigh didn't have a lot of luck. That was a problem with the fuel tank in his boot. His boot was given to Barry DeLar, another great driver in South Africa. But the funny thing was, I bumped into Derek Issett, of all people. I thought, what are you doing here, Derek? You know, Alton Broad driver, Formula 3 driver. Yeah. Anthony Hiscock was there as well. And that was 3 or 4 different English drivers racing over there in the Formula 1 side and Formula 3 side as well. So we all had a good knees up in South Africa that time, you know. 2 trips over there, all expenses paid, so I weren't complaining about that. I weren't complaining at all. And had fun. I met some fantastic people.
And we'll talk more in a moment about you meeting fantastic people. And after this short video clip, I want to just play. We'll come back and we'll talk about your relationship with Sweden, because you know you've got a long history with Sweden, the Mora Club, and various people. So we'll just watch you, and I'll tell you what this video is all about, Peter. So this is just some of your boats, and there's been many. I was going to count them all, but if I'd have started counting even on Tuesday, I'd still be counting now, because I don't know if you know how many boats you've raced over the years, but it seems like every photograph that I was getting pinged to me was Rixie in a different boat. I know it's Rixie because it's 59, that's Rixie's number, so it's obviously Rixie because there's nobody else. And there's another picture, and there's another boat, there's another picture. It's a catamaran, but it's a hydrocat, so that's a hydro technically. So anyway, everybody, have a look at this. This is some, and I stress some, of Peter's boats. Mike Ward has just texted in, and Mike Ward has told us that he has 30 different boats for you in his database. Now, Mike Ward is the fund of all knowledge, the historian of the sport. He's got records of everything about everybody. So we'll go with 30 because I think that's a pretty reliable source of boats. I don't know, there seemed like 30 in the video. There seemed like 100 in that, what we just seen. But yeah, various boats, different styles of boats, hydrocats, laydowns, 350s, 500s, sit down hydro, mono. What was your favourite boat?
The favourite boat was the prop rider hydro, of course. I mean, that always was. I loved laying down. I loved racing. That was the physically that was absolutely exhausted. You're racing one of those at speed. A 700 was hard work driving that for 4 minutes around Alton Broad, 6 laps. I mean, good God, your arms were aching, your fingers were aching. That was after the first heat. The second heat, you always felt better after that because the pins and needles had gone. But the prop rider was obviously the need for speed. You were laying down. You were very close to the water. And I kept going. You just headed out there and you grabbed the throttle and you went. I love the kneelers, obviously. Driving the kneelers, various kneelers over the years. But when I went over to the catamaran or the hydrocats in, I don't know what it was, 2099, whatever it was, I called it armchair racing. You didn't get physically worn out. You were sitting there working pedals and buttons and things, driving. The first one was not really a quick boot. Jeff Terry gave me that, and it came from Sweden, from Kent Rom actually. But the second one was given to me by Mike Taylor. That was a Chesman Peveril, and that was a good boot, a very, very quick boot. But the third one that came along was the Russian boot, and that was a gift from a friend of mine in Berlin. And I said, "Come and pick it up, it's yours." So we drove off to Berlin and picked it up, brought it back. Fantastic boot. It was built for 350, but I put a 700 on the back of it, and that's how I
like
raced.
You would do.
And that was one of the cats. I mean, I just loved that boot. It was just absolutely a dream to drive. It was made for a slightly smaller driver than me, so I was a pretty tight fit in the boot, but it drove well, and I gave it. Norman Bell drove it, and Neville Moore drove it. I gave it to lots of people to have a go in to see for themselves what to do in the thing, you see. That was fantastic.
Because you could back then, because obviously this is a non-cell.
Oh, yeah, they were non-cell boots, yeah.
Back in the day.
The 2 years I had this boot at Alton Broad, I was club champion 2 years on the trot. And I was the first person to win the club championship, which sounds silly really, but in a racing boot. It had been won by Paul Gillens and different people in Yamato since the club championship started. So I won it 2 years on the trot. That was for the 500, 500 Koenig. And that was so reliable. And I just literally, every time I pulled the string, that thing went. Fantastic boat to drive. Absolutely fantastic boat to drive. Then changed over to the cell boat, obviously, after my problem with my brain aneurysm and a bit of time off racing and that. I then went to the cell boat, another Malgard boat, a one-off that was built at Christian Malgard for Michael Fors in Sweden. And that boat was unbelievably quick. And that's the boat that I put the new Connie 700 on. And the first time I used that brand new Connie 700 engine, I got from the pits to the clubhouse, and that was it. It locked up solid. And I thought, oh, this is my first brand new engine. Sent it back the Friday. It arrived back a week later, put it on the Malgard, and we smashed the lap record. That was unbelievable, that boat was. And that felt good to me, driving that boat, apart from the fact that you're strapped in. And I thought, well, fair enough, I'm strapped in this, but I had one mishap with it once at Alton Broad, past the clubhouse, when it suddenly hooked and went left. The pickle fork flew off, the deformable pickle fork flew off, and it was so quick, I pulled the jack plug, and I thought, my God, if this had gone over, I've got to get out of this. I haven't got no air in this boat. There weren't room to put air in it. And that totally put me off being strapped in. There wasn't no room for the air, and the crash helmet with the built-in oxygen bottle on your leg, I think it was Tiger, I think it was called, was about £1,600. That was a lot of money to buy. So I then took the chance and said, well, that's it, the cat's got to go. I'm going back to hydros. I know it's risky. And I went back to racing the barge, but Penty's boat, the barge.
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Jolly good. Where did we get to? Yeah.
So So anyway, sorry about that, everybody. We obviously wind and I don't know, was blowing. I don't know, maybe it was Scott Giddens' lightning strike that he's just sent us that has sent us down. But yeah, it is a little bit like a race night. Jamie Hutton stop start and all sorts of things. Gremlins in the system. But yeah, so we talked about boats. You were talking about the hydrocat days and the Mulgard. That's where we kind of got up to, and you being strapped in. And then you went back to the barge. You also you were given also Doug Willie's boat to restore, so you've done a little restoration project there. Tell us quickly a little bit about that and how that came about.
Well, that's when we lost Douglas. I mean, Kim decided to put up a trophy in memory of her dad, and I decided, well, we've got hold of one of Doug's boats. Let's get it painted up in the old 1960s colours, which was olive green. So I totally restored the thing, painted it all up in the old colours, and Philip, the mechanic of Doug, done all the stickers for it as they were in the day. And we brought it out for the Doug Willie Memorial Trophy for the first time. Unfortunately, that meeting, Julian Codner won the meeting, of course. I finished second or third, it might have been, because I threw a blade off the prop in the last race. So I'd had two good races in the boot, and I think it was about the third lap in the last race it threw a blade at the top of the broad, so we didn't finish that one. But I'm sure I got third. I did get third that day, yeah. So I won a trophy. But I done that, for Douglas's sake at the end of the day. Restored the boat and out there, and I got the video of it. Kim's husband made a lovely video of the entire meeting, and I've got the video of that as well. So that was my little bit for Douglas. But the classic side then, the national side had died in England. There weren't enough boats to do the nationals really in trophy. I finished doing the nationals in 2000 anyway, although I did make a comeback in 2010 for that one particular season in the national series. I concentrated on club racing, getting new drivers in, the training boot, and the classics, involved with the Swedes and the classics. Because we had this 100-year anniversary meeting at Alton Broad in 2003. Well, 2001, I went back to South Africa and got married to my dear Trish. But 2002, January 13th, I unfortunately had this brain aneurysm. I was rushed off to Cambridge and had brain surgery. So 6 months out of racing, made a quick comeback in July, back in the cat again. But then the Battle of Britain meeting, the last one of that season, the day after, I had another problem, brain seizure. So I had to miss racing for 12 months. So I couldn't race in 2003, and that was the year that the anniversary meeting was taking place. And I said to the management committee, look, you can do the sports boot side, but leave the hydro side to me. So I did, organised it. Me and Trish funded it when we had the George Barrow Hotel at the time. And I managed to get 5 drivers back here from Sweden. Two of the originals that had been over here in the 60s. And Alan Cable, I managed to get back from America. And Alan was another fantastic driver, a good friend in his days in the 70s as well. So we had this wonderful meeting organised. I supplied the trophies myself, which I made myself, to give the drivers. And that night was as windy as it was today. It was the windiest night we'd had for a long time. But we managed to get all the racing in. Neville Moore even drove my cat at that meeting. So we put that on, and that was befriending the Swedes again. And since then, I've been a member of the Classic Club in Sweden ever since. Every year. And done 7 years in Sweden, every year going over there to race. They call it demonstration race with the classic boats and the classic drivers. And that did finish at Mora 10 years ago, the circuit. They still carried on, but not so many boats. But a couple of years ago, it was back on again, and I went back to Sweden again to that meeting when they had the international race, because all the classic boys were there again, and we had fun. And obviously last year, nothing happened. And I was hoping this year we'd be back to Sweden again this year, but I don't think anything is going to happen in Sweden with any racing at all this year at the moment. But the classic thing I love, and that's why I finished up racing in Crescent, 3 or 4 years ago on board in the Neela, again for the whole season. And that was so much fun, getting back on your hands and knees and you were just beating the Yamatos. They weren't as quick as Wayne, obviously, and anybody else, but you could beat the Yamato just about. And that was 50 years old, that engine. 50 years old. Pablo Connie was making the spare parts for us because you couldn't get anything anymore. Connie made crankshaft pieces, he made pistons for the Crescents and all sorts. So we got them back on the water, and those engines are still around today.
So bringing us a little bit more up to date with like the hydro side of things, because I know your passion, obviously, for the classics, and I know obviously, there's been that relationship with the Swedes, and we've not really got time to talk about everything that I want to talk about, but I'll just quickly mention obviously the Safri family, that I know that you helped obviously Glenn when he was over, because Glenn came over for a time and raced OSY, which was a big part of your making that happen, and it was good to have him over here, and that, so there's always been that strong link. But kind of moving on and moving things kind of up to date, so your opinion then on the newer breed engine, like, I mean, obviously now we've got the Rossi, the GRM engine, and the VRP, obviously they're quicker than a Koenig engine, but with the 500s, everything's Hydrocat now, and there was rumours that, was that going to be the way how 350 might end up going sort of into the Hydrocat thing rather than being a prop rider class? What's your opinions, first of all, of the new breed engines, and also 350 should remain a prop rider class?
Well, the new generation engines obviously are much quicker. I mean, the 125 is a brilliant little engine, and there's 3 or 4 different companies all made that engine over the last 10 years. And the VRP and the Rossi are both competing against each other, really and truthfully, in that class. And it's a very good class. There's drivers coming up from Yamato going into that class. So that's a good starter class. It's a very hard engine to drive as well, a very hard boat to drive, because it's got loads of top-end power. But you've got to get it around the buoy. And the bottom buoy is not easy at Alton Broad to get round. The 250 is a brilliant class. The 250 is a really fast class. Julian Codlin proved the point his first time up at Lake Coniston with his 250. On his first run, he smashed the record. He took the 250 up to the same speed as Chris Appleby done with his 700 Koenig on his first attempt. He broke the world record by 15 to 16 mile an hour. I couldn't believe it. And he said, that's it, I'm not going to do any more. That's it, I've finished. I ain't going to have any more runs. He just smashed the record to pieces. So that's how fast the new generations can go. But they're extremely temperamental. And they don't have to go through some pistons and bits and pieces very, very quickly if you want to push the maximum out of the engine. Great engines to see, though. New technology.
With new technology, you kind of hope to think that new technology brings new interest and ultimately new equipment, new boats, but mainly new drivers. Before we go into that, I just want to have a look at some, and again, not all, because we don't have time to have a look at everyone that you've helped over the years, but I want to just play this. This is some of the drivers. Some you'll know, some you won't know, viewers, but these have all come out of the Rixie Racing training days. Have a look at this. So we end the clip there with Wayne Boyd. It's the last picture, and Wayne is current. Wayne still races now, and he's doing very well with some very, very top class material equipment. But of course, other names that were in that list: Sarah Wintle, who's now, of course, Sarah Dobson. There was Paul Hart, went on to become a Formula 500 driver. There, Thomas Cesny, and drivers that have gone on, from your training school, but they've gone on to become bigger stars in their own right. Like Salas, I mean, just briefly tell us about. I know this is an interesting and entertaining story. Tony Salas, ex-stock car driver, decided. How did that happen? He decided to have a go in the boat. He knew who you were. I mean, how did it all work out? What happened there?
Tony Salas was down at Alton Broad watching the international event, the Yamato event, and I got a phone call. I mean, the racing was Saturday and Sunday. I got a phone call on the Monday from Tony Salas, and somebody had said, ring Rixie, and he called me up and said, I'd like to have a go in the training boat. And I said, yeah, no problem at all. I told him where he lived. He came round. I met the guy, and I said, right, you're out this Thursday in the training boat. And he came out on the Thursday, and he done 3 heats at Alton Broad and a scramble. So we done 4 heats on his first night at Alton Broad, and he said to me, great, but they ain't quick enough. So I said, oh, all right then, do you want to progress up? Oh, yeah. So the following week, I got him out in one of my 500s, so 500 on a prop rider hull. Told him what to do, pedals to work, throttles and how everything worked, sent him out in practice, and he gave the officer of the day a heart attack. He was riding that boat so high, first time in the thing, and he came in all smiles and said, that was really great, I loved that, And Mike Stanton was the officer of the day that day, and Mike said, can you slow him down a bit? He was giving us all a heart attack. And directly after that, Tony said to me, can you find me a boat? Can you find me an engine? Yep, I got an engine for you. I just rebuilt a complete engine for him. Went to see my old sponsor, Neville Moore, who had a prop rider hull down there, which I think was Julian Rotes, Ringwood boat at the time. And we put it together for Salas, and he went out and raced, and he was just a ballistic missile. And that was his first season in 0500. Then he progressed his way up into the Cats with a Russian fork boat and the Koenig engine. And then he finished up with a Trombetta boat and a VRP. And he was quick. He was very quick. He was 2 seconds faster than me at Alton Broad. But he couldn't catch me when I had a 5-second start with a handicap. And when I set the lap record, he couldn't catch me that night. He couldn't get past me. And he was pulling the hair out of his head.
and of course, talking the lap records quickly, because you still currently hold a lap record at Alton Broad.
I still have the lap record for 700cc, yeah. Tony Salas went 2 seconds quicker with the new generation 500. I've still got the lap record for 700 all them years, but Wayne Turner is now only half a second away with his 250 on a hydro. But at the time when we did those records, I think there'd only been 7 people in the club's history, it might be 8, I can't remember now, who'd ever been faster. There's only Salas been faster than me round Alton Broad in the club's history. But I know Tom Percival, obviously, with a 3.5 litre, and John Nicholson, and people like that were doing the fast times, the late 20s, early 30s and that. But I still don't think, I know Scott went and done it and blew the record away a couple of years ago. But I know I'm still possibly, me and Salas are probably the, 8th and 9th fastest round Alton Broad in the history of the club.
Must be satisfying for you, though, knowing that obviously Salas went on to do what he went and done and progressed. And 2 drivers I want to talk about quickly as well is Thomas Cesny, who's going to make a comeback. More on that in a second. But Wayne Moyes as well, because Wayne, you got him into the sport back in the day, I don't know, was it late 90s, was it? Or maybe early 2000s, when it was all the Triangle Garage team. Dave Durrant, was involved, sort of Wayne, and I believe your boss as well. And so you brought Wayne through, and then Wayne kind of took a bit of a backseat, kind of walked away a little bit from the sport, and then but then he made a comeback. I mean, that's got to make you proud to think, well, actually, Wayne and Wayne's represented, the country of late, along with Jamie Marr and Daniel Drake. They've gone abroad, they've actually participated in international events. So it must be satisfying for you knowing that there are still people like Wayne, like Jamie Marr, like Daniel Drake, wanting to represent not only the country, but more importantly, the club.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just hope Wayne keeps at it. I mean, he's a good he's a good driver. He's got some good equipment there. He does put his heart into what he do. Finding the crew, the mechanics, the people that pull the string is the most important thing about hydro. And if he could find two regular, reliable people who are there for him all the time, take a bit of the sweat away from him, he'll do well. But I was hoping that Wayne was going to go up and have a go in a racing hydro. But I spoke to him recently and he said no, he's not going to go that way. But until you've tried it out, I always said, until you've tried it, don't knock until you've tried it. End of story, If just for club racing. Because I think anybody racing, I never, ever, ever entered a world championship thinking I was going to be world champion. You've done it because that was a big thing to do once or twice in my lifetime. South Africa was great. I raced in Lithuania and became Baltic champion in 2001. I went over to the European Championships over in Germany and had an accident over there. That put me off the top runners over there. I was fourth in one race and then got banged. I was more interested in the national series and bringing drivers into club racing. And this is what I still think about today. We have to get club racing going. You have to bring drivers in somewhere, and it's got to be cheap. And there are so many outfits in England now, what I call classic boats. They're still a lot quicker than Yamatos and that. The 500 Connies and 700, they're laying around in England now. Keith McVeigh's, Nigel Bilton's doing nothing at all. And that's cheap outfits for people to come out to Alton Broad. If you want to have a go and see what it's like to race at Alton Broad and have some serious speed around you, they are there and they are available for people to use. And I'd sooner see them at Alton Broad and go abroad, because most of the stuff I've had has gone abroad.
It is good to keep stuff in this country. I mean, some of the stuff I've had, I've managed to keep over here, which brings me on to the Lacey Goodman family, because somehow and rather randomly, both boats which they're going to race in the future, at some point I've raced or owned or whatever. But obviously you're going to bring them through. Thomas Cesney also making noises about coming back. I think you told me he's got Glenn Safrey's Trombetta boat, I believe.
Yeah, he's got the outfit, Glenn's complete outfit. Yeah. It's come back to Thomas after quite a few years, but he's now 40 years old next birthday, not 20 like he was when I first met him. And I helped that lad when he came to Alton Broad and raced in the international event. Finished in 17th place, but I thought it's a good driver. I could see that lad is good. Come back again, I said, if you can. He did. We stuck him out in the Neela at Alton Broad and he won the meeting. And from that day, I said, well, I'll look after you. And I did. And he done the British Nationals and he got second behind Craig Speller. He couldn't beat Craig, but he kept behind everybody else. He done the he done the Internationals, Baltic champion when I was over there as well. He did really well. Then he went into 500 and he had the Hydra Cat and he drove that really well. But there was so few boats racing then, the Cats. He packed up, everything disappeared, and he's been off the scene. And then decided last year that he wanted to come back now. He's lost weight, which is a good thing with Yamato. And he bought the outfit. And so I've got 3 Yamato outfits to look after. Which isn't a problem with Ginge and with my son Christopher and with Prue. We need a couple more volunteers to come and give us a hand. But that's 3 boats I hope to be looking after. I don't know whether it's going to happen this year, to be honest with you, with this bloody virus that's going around. I shouldn't swear, but I did. But at the end of the day, next year, at the end of the day, next year, I hope to still be alive. And we want to keep going at Alton Broad. We want to keep hydroplane racing going at Alton Broad.
Wayne Noyes has texted us. He's just put his message to the group saying, give me a 250. I think we should maybe hold him to that and, find him a 250 or find him a classic 500 or just stick him out in an outboard. And then I've not got to worry about him beating me. So that just eliminates him from my problem.
If anybody wanted to drive a racing hydro, if they come and ask me, I'll supply them one to drive. And they can try it out. I will do that. I have the means to get hold of this stuff to give people a chance to have a go at it. I don't want to make it common knowledge because I don't want 500 phone calls from one-time people that want to have a go one. They never see him again.
Well, what I do want to do is, obviously, we're going to sort of have to try and wrap things up. But I want to one final thought from you, and that really is what keeps the passion there after racing, after being at the top end of your game, after bringing drivers through. What is it? What is it about the sport that just keeps you wanting more, even though you've retired, but you still want to help?
The camaraderie and the friendship. Having friends all over the world, in all these different countries, permanent life friends, and they are life friends, and keeping the sport going. That's what I like. I want to be sitting down Everett Park with Ginger in our wheelchairs watching you lot still going round.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. And well, let's keep our fingers crossed that we do get something happening on the water this year. If not, then we're all going to have to be dealing with these kind of interviews, I guess, and I'm going to have to keep doing them. But thanks very much, Peter. I've not fitted in half of the stuff I wanted to fit in, but you know it. We could just sit here all night and talk hydros, and then we'd get onto sports boats. We didn't mention about you going into monos, which I wanted to ask why that happened. But maybe we'll save it. We'll save that for another day. Rixie, can you come back on the show at some point and we'll talk
Anytime.
Yeah, so we'll do, because I've not touched on the Sweden thing too much. I've not talked about you and sponsors too much. There's just been too much to talk about. But as I say, enjoy the rest of your evening in your bar. You can unlock the door now. You can now let Trish in and tell her that you've done well. Tell her that you didn't swear. So you've done really well.
Well, I'm looking forward to putting this on the telly and looking at it later myself anyway, to see what I
did. It's
did
in about 4
think I made of
sections
myself.
now, so you'll have to find it. But we'll try and put a show together. But listen, Peter, thanks very much indeed.
No
enjoy
problem.
the rest of the evening and come back again soon.
Take care, all the best.
Thanks, everybody, and sorry about the technical gremlins.